Is it just me, or was January literally 11 months long? Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Brianna and this is 4 Paws in a Book. I make bookish videos over here on my little corner of the internet, so that's something that you're interested in. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below. We are finally out of the month of January. I felt like it was so long, but it's time to talk to you about the books that I read during the month of January. Most of these books I did talk about in vlogs, so I will link them like up above, down below, wherever I can. Honestly, over half of the books were the you choose my reading taste or you decide my reading taste vlog. I still haven't come up with a great name for that series, but that one took up the majority of my month. That being said, I did read 19 books in the month of January. I really wanted to get to 20, but that's okay. We were cutting it close there. I read a total of 6,113 pages, which is actually kind of low for me. I think it's because there were a couple of books that I was reading like I had to read physically. We didn't have audiobooks for them, so it kind of like slowed down my reading time. 10 of the 19 books had some form of diversity in them, whether that was a person of color, queer representation, disability representation, plus size representation, something that is like outside of the normal like cookie cutter main characters. And that's good. I'm trying to get at least 50% of my reads, so 10 out of 19. That's just over 50%. We love to see that. As far as how I read these books, I kind of talked a little bit about it. I read 8 books via audio only. I read 4 books via ebook. I read 2 books physically, which doesn't seem like a lot, but I read 5 books as a mixture. So I either immersion read them or I physically read them for a little bit and I like listened to the audiobook for the rest. 9 books came off of my physical TBR prior to the start of the year, and 2 books I purchased in January and read them. The rest of them I do not have physical copies of. I read 18 books targeted at an adult audience and 1 targeted at a middle grade audience. It was a NetGalley arc that came in, and then then the audiobook also came in, and it was like a really quick book, so I added it to like up my NetGalley account a little bit. I didn't have any 1 or 1.5 star reads, so that was good. I had 2 2-star reads, 1 2.5 star read, 6 3-star reads. Very middle of the road here. 1 3.5 star read, 4 4-star reads, 3 4.5 star reads, and 1 5-star read. And then I had 1 that I didn't rate because I don't like rating nonfiction. It feels weird to like rate somebody's like personal memoir or personal stories, but that book is actually my favorite book of the month, so we're actually going to talk about it last. So that equals out to an average rating of 3.5 for the month. That's like right on the verge of being a win. As far as genres, I read 1 contemporary, 5 fantasy, 3 fantasy romance, 2 horror, 1 nonfiction, like I said, 3 romance, 1 sci-fi, and 3 thrillers. That's all the stats I have for you. I'm going to talk about the books from the book that I liked the least to the book that I liked the most. So we're going to start out with the 2-star reads. I had 2 2-star reads. Both of them were in vlogs. So the first one was in my Spiffbo vlog, and that was Cold West by Clayton Snyder. This is one of the Spiffbo finalists, and it is a fantasy western novella with some like horror elements in it as well. And I talked about this one quite a bit in that vlog, so I'm only gonna like show you the highlights here. I think this book had a really good idea, but the execution of it just didn't hit for me. With it only being about 140 pages, I struggled to understand the world that our character was in. I struggled to understand our character's motivations. This book hits you with a gut punch in the very first chapter where you see our main character burying his wife in front of his 2 sons, and it's heart-wrenching. But then we kind of go on this like wild goose chase, and I lost the plot. So unfortunately, it did not work for me. I think that had it have been like longer and like maybe a full-length novel, it would have worked better. But on its own, like as a novella, it didn't work for me. But it works for a lot of people. Like I said, it's a Spiffbo finalist, so a lot of people are liking it. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, I will have links to every book I talk about down below. The other 2-star read was my least favorite of all of the 10 in the BookTuber favorites video or vlog. Unfortunately, I didn't like this book. If you have not watched that video and you want to, please go do that first, because obviously this wrap up is going to spoil all of those. You're supposed to choose between the books to continue on in the maze. You will know the answer if you watch this first. So go do that, then come back. I gave 2 stars to A Ruin of Roses by K.F. Breene. This is a like shifter Beauty and the Beast retelling, which in concept sounds really interesting, but this book was like just smut. It was just smut. I mean, she walks through the forest, you know, trying to find her dad, as she does in Beauty and the Beast, and she's overcome with lust magic. Lust magic. That's a word I read on page. Take that how you will. There is one character in here that is kind of like the Lumiere character, and he is absolutely ridiculously funny. I loved him, but he was like the highlight of the book, unfortunately. Didn't care about the main characters. I didn't like the writing. The smut scenes were really cringy, and there were so many of them. So unfortunately this book did not work for me. Moving on to my 2.5 star read, and that was Ways to Make Sunshine by Renee Watson. This is a middle grade story, like a middle grade contemporary. Now this 2.5 star rating kind of sounds, it sounds lower than it actually probably should be. I double weight my enjoyment, like I've talked about this year. I kind of changed my system, and so like me personally, I didn't necessarily enjoy this book, but I think that if you have like a 7 to 10-year-old, this book might be great for them, like to read to them or read with them, because it's kind of like it's got chapters, but it's still very much a younger kid's book. I absolutely believe that we need more books about black tweens and black kids, because like this little girl is going through a lot and trying to figure out like why her hair is different than her friend's hair, and why she can't get her hair wet in the swimming pool and her friends can, and like there's so many different things that like need to be talked about in middle grade books. So don't let this like lower rating dissuade you. There's a lot of things that are happening in this book. It kind of spans an entire school year, and like I feel like we just kind of glossed over some of the high points rather than like really diving in deep into like maybe just a couple of them, which is one reason why I just think like the pacing of the book was a little bit off. These are struggles that like kids do go through. I mean, her parents are dealing with financial issues, and even though Ryan's just a kid, like she understands that like her parents are struggling. There was a little bit of a conflict that was introduced at the very end of the book that I think like actually could have been an entire plot point, but we just kind of like glazed over it and like just okay, we're done. So personally, not necessarily the book for me, but like if you work in a school library, if you have like that age group kids, definitely pick this book up. Now let's move on to our 3 stars. I did have a bunch of them, so it was a very middle of the road kind of month. So the first one I don't have a copy of anymore, and that is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. This is a like crime thriller about a man who is the first black sheriff in this town. He used to work for the FBI, and then he comes back to, I think it's his hometown, and he becomes the first black sheriff. And so he's dealing, like, he's got an uphill battle. And then there's this mystery they have to solve with this serial killer. And I don't know, for as dark as this book could have been, I felt like not a lot happened in this book, which is why I struggled with it so much. There were so many like small moments where it was just the character like worrying about his girlfriend, worrying about his relationship, and like all these other things that I'm like, I actually don't care about that. Let's go find the guy who is brutally murdering people. There are elements of this book that really felt like a Criminal Minds episode, which I kind of really liked, but overall it was just, there was not enough tension, not enough like buildup in this book. I totally understand what the author was trying to do. There was a lot of commentary in it, but just from an enjoyment level, I didn't like this one that much. I do think that if you liked Midnight is the Darkest Hour, you might also like this one. They have very similar aspects to it in just like the type of story that it is, kind of this small town crime type thing. There's the plot is very different, obviously, and the commentary is very different, but the vibes are similar. However, I liked Midnight is the Darkest Hour more. Next up, I gave The Fury 3 stars by Alex Michaelides. This is disappointing because I really wanted to like this book, and I think after reading this one, DNFing the Maidens, I think that The Silent Patient is just a one-off. I think that like maybe I just don't like his books. There's not a lot I can tell you about this book that like won't spoil it, but the things that I didn't like about this book really spoil the book. So we're gonna be really vague here. It has a very weird writing style. It is about this man who is kind of like telling you the story after the fact about a group of people who go to this remote Greek island. And there's a lot of like rich people problems happening. There's a lot of drama between the people that are at the island. And I liked the way that the twist happened at the end. I think it was well done, like on a writing, like a technical writing standpoint. However, it did kind of feel like, I don't know, it just like lessened the stakes of the whole thing, if that makes any sense. I don't know. This is like truly the epitome of, and I'm going to say this a couple of times, especially with these 3-star books, this is a book that existed. I read it. I'm not going to keep it, and I don't think I'm going to read any more of Alex Michaelides anymore. Like maybe if another book gets like stellar reviews, I'll like find it at the library or something, but this one just, it didn't work for me, unfortunately. But I had a NetGalley arc of this as well, and got it in my Book of the Month box, so I was able to check off a couple of NetGalley, you know, loans throughout this month. Okay, I have a couple know of categories of 3-star reads because I think 3 stars is the most like nuanced rating that you can have. So we had the books that truly existed. Now we have, this book is actually really well done. It's just not me. It's just not a me book. It's not a Brie book. And that is Arrival Most Vile by R.K. Ashwick. I want to find this book's audience because this book is adorable. If you like Legends and Lattes, if you liked TJ Klune, I think that this book will really work for you. This book is hella gay, which, like, obvious plus. It's about these 2 potion makers, and one, like, grumpy potion maker has an established business. This is like the shop that you go into after your D&D quest, and it has such a quaint small town feel to it. And then we have this other guy, Eli, who comes in and he sets up a new shop across the street, and they become these rival potion shops. And then the mayor of the town says, look, I need you to work together on this potion because my daughter wants wings and I want to give them to her. So they have to come up with this, you know, they have to work together. They have to figure out how to work together even though they hate each other. There's one point where he calls the other character son of a wood dragon. And it's cute. It's so cute. It's adorable. But I think that this book struggled in an outside plot aspect because once we got past the rivals aspect of it where like they didn't hate each other anymore and actually they just like really cared for each other, I didn't care anymore. The book completely lost its plot. It was just these 2 characters being really cute together. And if you want that, if you want just 2 characters doing fun things and going to sports games, I don't know, it was some sort of like fantasy sports, kind of like basketball, but like fantasy. Like if you want a scene like that, this is the book for you. It's adorable, like when they're like prepping to go on a first date, but I was bored. I was very bored throughout like the second half of this book. So, like I said, this is just not a Brie book, but it's someone's favorite book of the year. I know what's gonna happen. Next up in the not a Brie book, for like reasons I don't know, because parts of this feel like a Brie book, we have Mayfly by C.J. Leede. Okay, this book 3 stars. I think this one probably bridges the this is a book that exists and not a Brie book pretty well, so it's kind of in both. It's got one foot in both camps. This is like a splatterpunk extreme horror about a girl who is essentially a Disney princess. They don't ever use the word Disney, but it's very obvious, like she's Elsa. She kind of gets upset that like men can be serial killers and have this like notoriety to them, but women never get to have that. So she like takes on this bloodier, more aggressive persona. And I don't know, you're very much in her head the entire time, which at times is really cool. And then at times it's like quite literally nails on a chalkboard because you have this like internal stream of consciousness the entire time. And I can't really tell you what didn't work about this book because I think like I was expecting, maybe I was expecting more because I had just heard like this is so gross. This is the grossest thing you ever read. And like the cover screams gross, right? But at the end of the day, it just kind of ended up like it was a horror book for sure, and it had its gross moments, especially like when it was dealing with teeth. I can't deal with teeth in horror. But I don't know if it was just because we had some like low character moments where she was trying to take care of her grandmother, where we just never like it never like stayed on the edge of gross and disgusting. I don't know that I'm trying to like look for recommendations that just stay gross and disgusting the whole time because I don't know if I could handle that. I don't know, there was just something that didn't work for me in this book. And I don't know what it was. Then we have the next group of 3 stars, and that is
I'm so mad at you.
I had such high expectations for this book. It feels like it should be a Brie book, and it's not. And it was disappointing. So we had the books that exist and read them. We have the books that are like, this is somebody's 5-star read, but it's not mine. And then we have, this should have been my 5-star, but it's not, because you did something just horrifically wrong. So the first one is The Foxglove King by Hannah Whitten. This book should have been a Brie book. It has necromancy, it has court politics, it has drama, it has a little bit of romance, it has a stabby main character, and it was so boring. I didn't care for the entire 400 and something pages if these characters died or not. And that's not a feeling you should have when you're reading a book. Especially a romance, like a fantasy romance book. This book was just so dry. There was no character development. I never connected to any of these characters, and so it was like, oh, okay, you went and did this thing. great. The world building is really interesting in here. We have these like, you know, bringing a horse back from the dead kind of vibe to it, and like the book takes place in the catacombs, and it's essentially like there's a cult that has started. If that's not describing a Brie book to me, I don't know what is. And I think that that's what upset me so much about this book. I feel like I could lower it, but I'm not going to. I'm unhauling this book and I'm not going to continue on with the series. I'm very frustrated. It's fine. It's fine. And then this one I might be like a little bit too harsh on, like saying like, oh, you did something egregiously wrong. I don't think that they did something wrong. It's just that the other books from this author have been 5 stars for me, and this one is their debut. So like you can tell they've gotten better, but that is something to talk about by Meryl Wilsner. This is a celebrity romance. And it's actually Berkley's first female-female romance. So I think there was a lot of high expectations of this book when it came out in like 2021 or 2020, something like that. But here's the thing, I have more chemistry with a wet piece of paper than these two characters had with each other. They were 2 co-workers that kind of like the media smushed together, and so then they were like, okay, let's just date. And like, I never believed their relationship for 1 iota of a second. This is about a like rich, famous, I don't know if she's a director or an actor. I can't even remember, to be honest. But she was giving like Evelyn Hugo vibes, which like, I was like, okay, I'm here for this. Except that like her entire thing was, you know, when the manager would come to Evelyn Hugo saying like, hey, people are talking about you and Celia, you should go marry a man or go on a date with a man. So that we can get our, you know, the media off our backs. She's just like, I actually don't care. So that was cool. But then like, as we went along the book, she actually did care, and it was weird. There was some like very biphobic comments in here that were addressed, but still like, we're like, oh, that was a bit much. And there was a lot of like behind the scenes of Hollywood, which like I can like, but I just don't think this one was done in an entertaining way. And the biggest problem was just I didn't care about the characters, and I didn't see the 2 of them together. When you look at Meryl's other books, which I'm not going to mention because they are St. Martin's titles and I'm not reviewing them on my channel, but when you look at those characters have so mumuch chemistry and so much like development within themselves. So it's definitely something that like it's a practice that had to be perfected. And in this book, they definitely needed some work. So I'm really glad to say that Meryl's books definitely get better, but you could skip this one and no one would be missing anything. Now let's talk about my 3.5 star read. This is another book that I read for the BookTubers favorites, and that was Monstrillo by Germano Simano Cordova. I'm definitely saying that wrong. I'm so sorry. This is one of the books that I read for horror, and this is a grief horror about a woman who loses her child, or parents that lose their child. And like again, it's one of those grief things again, where like chapter 1, you see it happen, which is like, you know, a way to open a book for sure in that time, like where she's like holding her son as he's dying. Then like most parents, most of the time, your first thought would be like to take a lock of hair or something like that. No, this mother takes the lung of her child after he passes, and then the lung starts growing and becoming sentient and like starts eating raw meat, and it was so weird and so unsettling. This definitely strays into the like lit fic side of horror, which is not a subgenre that I typically enjoy, and I think like this was another one that like I actually just wanted more of the horror and less of the personal development of our parents. And like I understand like that's what you go through after you lose a child, but for me, I was just like, I actually just want to see more about this monster that's being created out of a lung, and I want to know the science behind it, and I want to know like I want to know how the world is reacting to it outside of these 2 parents. I don't know, I wanted a little bit more of the monster and less of the parents trying to find themselves after losing a child. Now let's move into my 4-star reads. I had 3 of them. The first one I don't own, and that is Along the Razor's Edge by Rob J. Hayes. This is the first book in a completed 5-book series, and it is about our main character who was sold as essentially a prisoner of war, and she is like living in this pit, and she has to mine, and she has to like do all of this like slave labor in the pit, and then like the whole book is like her trying to escape it. This book, the world building was so cool. Like Rob J. Hayes has created this like game that's like blackjack, but like with rocks or stones that have slashes in them that like are the numbers. And it was just really cool to like flesh out the world that way, because this takes place in such a secluded area. Like you're in the pit for practically the entire book. And the way that this book is written, I think, is really interesting. And I think that there's a lot of people that have criticisms of this book. It's Eska talking about this book, the story, after the story has happened. And I feel like you can make the argument that like we've lowered the stakes because we know that Eska gets out, and we know that like, you know, she's just recounting the story. But it kind of worked so well. It kind of had this like Name of the Wind vibe to it of like, sit down, youngin', let me tell you the story. And I don't know, I kind of vibed with it. I'll definitely be continuing on with the series. Unfortunately, the books following the first one are not on Audible Plus anymore, so I have to like actually use a credit, which sucks. But I will get to them eventually. Next up, I gave 4 stars to The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This book, more people need to know it's gay. More people need to know that this is a sapphic book, because I think more people might like it, or more people might pick it up, because we need more queer thrillers, okay? So, anyways, this book is bonkers. Go in knowing that. Suspend all disbelief, because it's nuts, but it's kind of fun in a weird way. This is about a woman who is a writer. She's had writer's block for a couple of years now. She had a falling out with her best friend, and that kind of caused her to like not be able to think of any creative stories anymore. And she gets invited to go to this secluded cabin where this well-renowned, like Pulitzer-winning prize author, whatever, I don't know if that's actually what it was, but she's like well-renowned, right? And she is going to help this group of young writers write their next masterpiece, write their next, you know, award-winning novel. I really hope that you can't hear my dryer right now, but if you can, I'm so sorry. Her friend also gets invited to this, so there's like this really awkward like friend drama, and it's just, I don't know, like this, there was no like logic to this, there was no like, nothing seeped in reality, but I was just like, you were along for the ride. And I think like a few chapters in, I was like, all right, this is where we're going. Let's just buckle up. This book has been on people's best of the year and also worst of the year, so I went into it very, very hesitantly. I had a good time, and I think if you go into it knowing it's just a fun time thriller, like very popcorn read, and you don't take it too seriously, you might have a good time with it. Also, did I mention it's gay? I lied, I have 4-star reads, not 3. Next up is Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wang. This is a dark academia fantasy about a woman who is a high mage at this academy, and most of the time, all of the time up until now, it has been men taking that role, and so she is the first woman, and she gets like shit on every time she turns around. The assistant that they give her was not in fact a like qualified lab assistant that knows what the fuck he's doing, but a janitor. And so she has to deal with that. She has to deal with men being like, you need to, you know your place kind of thing. And this book is literally just, if The Man by Taylor Swift was a book, it would be this book. Because there's so many quotable moments of our high mage and our protagonist being just an absolute badass and like throwing shade every time a man says something that's ludicrous. And I absolutely loved that aspect of it. I do think that it was a little bit in your face when it comes to that. Like I loved it, but I can see why people wouldn't like it, because it's very much front and center, like this is the story, and it kind of hits you upside the head a couple of times. But overall, I really, really enjoyed this. I loved the world building of it. I loved our main character, and it was a really, really good book. I do not recommend you reading it physically though, because the font is terrible. Okay, I promise we're getting to the end. Our last 4-star book was The 7 Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This is the same author that wrote The Dead Romantic, so it's kind of a contemporary romance with this like speculative twist on it. And this is about a woman who inherits her aunt's apartment, and there are 2 rules of the apartment. Take your shoes off when you get in, and don't fall in love in the apartment. That apartment kind of slips into other places in time. And so currently it is 7 years in the past, and so there's another man in the apartment from 7 years ago, and they're like kind of like coexisted living, and like when she steps out of the apartment she goes back into her present day. It's a weird thing, but it kind of worked for me. And there's a lot of conversation about food, as our male main character is a chef or trying to be a chef, and so he has such like a passion for food, and I loved hearing about that part. And obviously, as one can probably infer, she breaks rule number 2 and she falls in love with this man. And it's a really interesting story, and I don't want to get into details because the journey kind of can get spoiled, right? Like, you know, it's a romance. like it's gonna be a happily ever after, but the journey and how they get there, I think, is what spoils this book. And so I highly recommend it. It's definitely a book that has some heavy themes in it, as she is dealing with grief and the loss of her aunt, who was basically her best friend. So there's definitely some heavier moments in this book, but also there's some really fun moments in here as well. Moving on to my 4.5 star reads, and I had 3 of those. The first 2 I don't own physically. The first one is Mislaid in Parts Half Known by Shauna Maguire. This is the 9th book in the Wayward Children series, so I cannot talk much about this one, especially because it's a direct sequel to Lost in the Moment and Found, which was last year's book. A lot of times these are like kind of standalone journeys within a much bigger world. This one is absolutely not. You cannot start here, because this is very much a continuation of Ansie's journey, and I absolutely love this book. It was darker, much like Ansie's first book was, and there's a lot of conversation about like losing things and finding things, and like it is that continuation of that story. But there were a lot of characters that have been in other books. It had a very Beneath the Sugar Sky feel to it, where like all of the characters are kind of coming back together, and like on this big quest, like project side quest thing. So I'm really excited to see how the book is going to start wrapping up, or the series is going to start wrapping up, because I think we're getting towards the end. I don't know if 10 is going to be the last one, or if there's more after that. I don't know. There are definitely some characters that I still want to know more about in the series, but overall, like, this is an absolutely wonderful series. I don't think I've given anything lower than 4 stars. There might have been one 3.5 star. Overall, I love these books, and they're really, really fun to just like completely binge read start to finish, and just like have a big 900-page book. I also gave 4.5 stars to Exit Strategy, which is the 4th book in the Murderbot series. This is the last novella in that first little chunk. Now we get into like a full-length novel, and I cannot wait to read that, because I love Murderbot. I love him as a character. They're just so fantastic, and this book is no exception. This book really just starts out with them trying to escape this like military base, and just trying to figure out like how to get out, and how to get out safely, and how to like blend in with the crowd. And I think my biggest critique with these books specifically is that they're too short. A lot of times things happen too easily in these books, and you have to do that when your book is 120 pages, right? You have to move things along in a quicker pace. And I think once we get into that full-length novel, and we can really dive into that nitty-gritty like struggles that Murderbot has to go through, it's gonna be even better, because I love Martha Wells' writing. It's fantastic. But like in this book specifically, not once was I like worried about Murderbot, because I knew it was gonna be fine, because we were just kind of like hitting those high points rather than like actually like causing some tension and some anxiety. Lastly, I gave 4.5 stars to Forget Me Not by Julie Soto. This was probably the biggest surprise of the month, because it's a second chance romance that I absolutely loved. And I'm so surprised that this is a debut novel. This book is so well done. Technically, it's well crafted. We have 2 points of view, so male main character, female main character, and the female main character's point of view, like chapters, are in present day, and then the male main character's views are in the past. And that is done so strategically, because not only are you seeing their original relationship happen, but you're seeing it through his eyes only, and he's the one pining after her. And it's just like, you can feel the pining, you can feel the angst as you like see him from her perspective in present day, having just read a chapter of them like falling in love the first time. And it's so well crafted. I probably should have started with this, but whatever, here we are. This is a book about a wedding planner who gets this huge wedding account, and she gets to put on this wedding, and it's huge. It's way more than she's ever done, and their only stipulation is that they had to use this one florist. Guess what? That one florist is her ex that she's been avoiding the last 2 years for reasons unknown. Like, we know they broke up, and we know that it was tragic, but we don't know why the entire book. And so like, you as the reader are just so clueless. It was just done so well. And I will 100% read anything else from this author. One of the things I don't like about second chance romance is a lot of times they don't tell you why a character broke up, or they don't give you a compelling enough reason why they should be back together. And this book I was afraid was going to do that for a really long time. And then when you do find out why they broke up, you're like, oh, that's not gonna work. I don't know how we're gonna fix this. And then the author fixed it and made it just so well done. The only reason this book is not getting a 5 is I think it tried to do one too many things, and that was right after the 50% mark we started talking about this like reality TV show. It was kind of like a TLC celebrity wedding, like we're gonna show the behind the scenes of this big wedding that you're doing. And I don't necessarily, like, first off, I don't think that's realistic. Like, you're a baby wedding planner and you're getting this, like, all this notoriety, but also like it just like it got in the way of the tension of the two characters, and we were like focusing on that when we didn't need to. That's the only reason, but it was still phenomenal. Then we get into my 5-star read, and that was The Fall Is All There Is by C.M. Kaplan. This is my only 5-star read of the month. It's also the book I annotated, so I don't know if there's a correlation there. We'll see. But this is a book that I read for my Spiffbo vlog, so you can check out my in-depth thoughts about this. But this has all of the political backstabbing that I love in a fantasy. This is about a man who is one of 4 quadruplets that are an heir to the throne. And that's messy, right? Because we're all born at the same time. And like the doctor was the one who like took the babies out first. So like, who is the God-given heir, right? And that's the concept of this story. He is essentially the youngest of the 4. So he's not really like trying to take the throne, but he is being gaslit by all of his siblings. And because we are only in his POV, we like kind of also feel gaslit too. And it's kind of a great, not a great feeling, but you know what I mean? Like it was well done, well written. There's also autism and anxiety rep in here that I think was done phenomenally. It was so relatable. I mean, there were so many times where like I made, like I would tab it and was like, nope, relatable. I don't know if you can see those notes, but it says, no, but why is this so accurate? When the quote is, my skull was buzzing, swimming through the white noise of all the hidden meetings tucked inside conversations I hadn't even conducted yet. If that's not a whole ass mood. I think I really resonated with this book, and that's why it worked for me. It was definitely like a right place, right time kind of book. But I'm so glad that I found this book, and I wouldn't have read it outside of Spiffbo. So really glad I found it. And then lastly, the book that I didn't rate, but is my favorite book of the month so far, and that is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is his nonfiction book, and it's it was a book that was mainly written during COVID, and you can tell that this man was like stuck in quarantine, stuck in his house with his family, and that's the only person he'd been able to talk to. And he has thoughts. The man has thoughts about so many things. And I think it's hilarious that we're talking about a book that's about reviews. Every single one of these things, it's like little tiny stories. Hold on, I'm gonna show you something. So we have a story called The Yips, right? And then we have this like little 2-page story about baseball players and the Yips, and then every single story ends with, I give the Yips 1.5 stars. I give the internet 3 stars. And it was so well written, and you could see like how fast his mind was working, and just like the thoughts that he had, and like wanting to get those thoughts out on paper. I think one of the things that happened during quarantine to so many people, I think it's why we had the rise of TikTok and things like that, was that we wanted to connect in some way to other people, and our brains were doing some like very creative things and like trying to organize all of our thoughts, if that makes any sense. And I think that that's what this was for John. And even if you don't like his writing style, or you don't like his YA fiction, I still think you should pick this up. This was thought-provoking, it was heartwarming, it was gut-wrenching and sometimes, and I don't know, this could potentially make my best books of the year. It is only January, so that's where we're at. Alright, those are the books that I read in the month of January. If you want to, let me know what your favorite book of January was, and we'll have a conversation down there in the comments. If you're not feeling chatty, do a sun emoji, because we actually have some sun for the first, like, we're only gonna have this today. It's gonna be gone by tomorrow. If you're new here and you have not yet subscribed, there's a little button that you can do so down below the video. If you'd like to hang out with me more, the links to my Instagram, Goodreads, Twitter, and my Patreon are linked in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!